So I grew up having like anxiety and depression, but I didn't really understand it. And I didn't really have a place to go to talk about it. Because a lot of my friends who were also Asian did not know how to support me, just because they also did not have that kind of support or access to information at the time. I remember struggling with depression or anxiety, throughout my teens, and then feeling very lonely and isolated as a result of that, just because it's like, okay, well, I can't talk to anyone about this because, I've been taught since I was young that issues that are happening within my family are supposed to be kept within my family. I don't want to make anyone in my family look bad because I care about them. But at the same time, how do I juggle the struggle that I have if I can't talk to anyone about it?
My parents grew up in China. Like, I'm first generation here. And so in China, I think it's very strict. Like, you have to be really good at what you do. And if you're weak, then you're left behind. Honestly, I didn't really think that much about mental health until it became a thing in society.
They never talked about it at all, so I was not really educated on the issue. And I feel like a lot of the stuff about mental health I had to really learn on my own. I remember one time I did try to talk about mental health, but they said oh, you need to get over it, just get over it. And he brought up examples of oh, well, your grandpa did A, B, and C. Well, that's you're facing nothing compared to what he's doing, so you got to get over it. I just didn't want to open up because I was afraid to be seen as weak or something like that, so that's a barrier for me.
I think one of the stigma that come with our culture is that mental illness, they are being perceived as your family must have done something wrong. We only talk about the good things. We don't want to burden other people, especially strangers, friends, of our problems. So that's why when we meet each other, the first thing we ask them, have you eaten? They don't say, how are you? If you're hungry, I can make you a noodle. I'll cook you some rice. That I can actually do something for you.
I wish that it wasn't so hard, to get therapy, to get on medication, because I had known something was up for a while, and then by the time that I told my parents, it had gotten pretty bad, and it was already such a big step to overcome to tell my parents, because I knew how they would react. There was always this emphasis on not telling people. I don't know, they were just every time before I met someone, they would be oh, don't tell this person this because it'll look bad on your medical school applications. I'm not even applying to medical school. Them being another obstacle in order to go to the doctor, in order to get prescribed medication, to go to therapy, was just a total strain. If they had just accepted that it was a thing.
My parents being divorced, I feel like they get two different sides of me. The way they present things doesn't come out in the best way. So if I ever talk to my mom about anything that's serious, I want to say serious in taboo ways towards them. So if it is mental health, or it is if I just want to go on a rant about a person and I'm not necessarily negatively commenting on them, I'm just expressing how I feel in the moment. And I feel when I brought stuff up to my mom, she thought it was this serious drastic issue. She'd be okay, I need to figure out all these ways to give my daughter advice instead of just being there to listen.
If you don't have an outlet, then they will snap, and when they snap, then the violence can be towards themselves or towards other people. In therapy, it's about the process, but that's just not in our culture. We just want to either avoid it or don't know how to deal with it. We feel helpless.
Having someone who looks like me not just validate my experience, but be accepting of it was really wonderful, because I've definitely come across experiences with people who are not Asian, or people who are white and mainstream approach to therapy does not work for everybody. Hence the reason why I really focus on this idea of holistic, culturally affirming therapy, because I've definitely been in front of therapists who didn't have an understanding of my culture, who essentially made blanket statements of like the type of person I am and what I bring to the table, and also made judgments about my healing process and my relationship with my family. I've encountered a lot of racism within the field as it pertains to how we provide services. If I'm going to be in this field doing this work, that the kind of care and therapy that I'm providing is centered around this idea of culture. And culture isn't just about your skin tone or what language you speak or like racially how you're classified, right? It's also like the culture of your family specifically.
Even Asians are very diverse, right? We were advocating for cultural competency, even in the psychiatrists, when they admit psychosis, patients, that they need to understand the cultural dynamic before they prescribe any medication.
When I talk about culturally affirming therapy, I think about embracing and discussing how the culture of the norms and the things that you've learned growing up have shaped you as a person. And so when I was in the social work school, that I guess like education and that information allowed me to have a lot more compassion towards not just my parents, but also like the cultural nuances of being like a first generation immigrant, just appreciating culture as it affects different people. I think it allowed my parents also to see that like this understanding that I had was actually able to help other people in my life and people within my community.
I still am very hesitant to reach out to my parents about anything because it's not the easiest talking, I feel like, to parents who were immigrants. Like, there's a big culture barrier, especially if you're raised here, and there's even a language barrier, so like that makes it really difficult to express. And sometimes like you don't know and you're afraid, like they probably don't understand you.
My mom is one of 7 kids, and so she came over as a refugee from the Vietnam War, and so she doesn't like talking about it that much. And I know like she gets really emotional whenever she talks about when she came over, having not that much guidance, and especially not like parental guidance while she was in America. Independency, very big on education because she's the only sibling that went to school. So I feel like a lot of that is just like there's a pressure between my sister and I just to do really well, especially because my mom wasn't watching over our shoulder. So just making sure we were like figuring everything out for ourselves and not messing up.
The pressures of wanting to be the best, wanting to be A+ student, definitely affected my athletic performance because I just felt like I was never good enough. I wish they would be more accepting. When I did get a good grade, they were like, okay, just do the same thing on the next one. I just felt like I didn't feel congratulated enough because that was what they expected me to do in the first place. And so, yeah, it was just a constant battle between trying to please them versus my own happiness in a way.
I kind of wish I got more like acknowledgement and like support, not like, trying to compare my struggles to something of a bigger, they think it's a bigger scope. Yeah, it's normal to feel this way. Just try your best to like look on the positive side and eventually it'll end. Like I wish I heard some speech like that.
Honestly, that would probably be the biggest thing. I'd probably just sit them down and be like, I need you guys to listen, and then not put any judgment, not make any comments, just getting over themselves and putting me first. I think that would be the one thing I want to tell them.
And it was kind of a tough environment to grow under, but I understand where it comes from, especially because our families, they just focus on work. They don't really think about these things.
For my dad's side, he's an immigrant from Bangladesh. Like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he was like always on the bottom, right? Like it was like food safety, money, security. So like for me to be like at the top and thinking about those needs, it feels kind of privileged. I don't know, because like I'm thinking about his family and his background and how they had just have like all this trauma and all this like poverty to deal with. And for me to be like, I am self-actualizing myself or whatever. And that's not something that he understood for a long time.
We were never thought of ourselves as an individual, right? We are the extension of our family, and our family is the extension of our community. Our community is the extension of, so it's very different from the Western or the American culture. Especially the American culture is very individualistic.
I started to understand more about the trauma that my family had gone through, living through war, coming here to a new country, language trauma of like not knowing and understanding how to speak English, generational trauma that's passed down, like unhealthy habits and ways of communicating. So it was like, it gave me a lens of understanding that like, okay, there are a lot of barriers culturally that exist because this is just how our communities have learned to survive and function. But at the same time, it's those barriers that are also keeping us from accessing help in the way that we need. More people are reaching out that have never been to counseling before. So it's interesting that COVID has created this, even though it's been a terrible ride in a lot of ways, but it's also created access for people who have never even thought about this before.
I'd say the hardest thing is also like, I never knew the day of March 6th was going to be the last day I ever see my friends like face to face, because after that it's like all social distancing and cameras and stuff like that. So I never really got a chance to say goodbye and like sign each other's yearbooks and stuff. Like I didn't get anything on my yearbook. My dad owns a company, so our financial situation became unstable because of that. So you add that on top of that, and then it's just really, really, really tough to get through it, like mentally.
Face it, being a person of color is not easy, right? You are going to have things thrown at you either verbally or physically or the system. This is a time when we need to support each other. So I'm still doing it. Once a week, I will go to my favorite Chinese restaurant and have a takeout. We need to know that we have a community that supports us, the community at large, that do not approve this type of violence behavior, and then we need to support each other, and we need to look out for each other. I mean, this is historic. So we are living in history. So it will be a good lesson for our children to learn. When we face with adversity, how do we deal with it?
People are processing like the stress and the treatment of not just Asian Americans during COVID, but with the Black Lives Matter movement too. Clients who not only are struggling with racism with COVID, are also dealing with how to be proper allies.
Embedded in our culture, we are supposed to be quiet about any sufferings. If you're sick, usually they probably kind of keep it quiet. They're like, I'll take care of myself. I won't worry anybody else. So I think this is why the Black Lives Matter movement is really hard for them to understand, because it's just so vocal. It's a very strong and a vocal movement that they don't understand why we need to raise our voices. They've learned from since they're younger, like, what's the point of speaking up? Nothing is going to change, obviously.
With my mom, had it just been like my mom, I feel like there are a lot of topics she would have just like shut down, not because she leans like one way or another on a topic, just because like she doesn't know how to talk about it.
Those conversations about anti-Blackness have always existed within our communities since we've immigrated here. We immigrated to this country because we were used as a model, basically the counterexample of like a Black American. And I think a lot of times if you ask like your folks or people who are older about where that came from, a lot of times they just don't even have an answer. They say, this is just how it's been. We don't like them because, and then they'll like spit out some news related source about like how there's violence within that community or whatever, without even recognizing that those ideas were given to them when they got here. We have also benefited, and we have to acknowledge that. When my clients are talking to their family about it, or even for me, when I talk to my family about it, it is tough because we have access to this information, and we've been educated in a way that allows this compassion and this ability to acknowledge and recognize our own privileges and experiences. But for people who are much older, like my mom's generation and older, they don't see that. People are talking about it more, but there are still challenges in that people don't want to acknowledge it, because somehow acknowledging that this exists means that your experience of racism hasn't mattered. When those things are not exclusive, they can happen at the same time.
You have to always remember, other people's opinion of you is not your reality. You need to know who you are and be happy with it. You don't need to be the best, but you're always good enough wherever you are.
The only way that we can break down those barriers is if we also acknowledge that we have shortcomings as a community. Not saying that in a negative way, of course, but saying it as a way of acknowledging that, like, this burden of being a model minority is a really heavy one. That's why we have friends, family, people that we know that suffer in silence. Being able to resolve emotional issues can lead to such a better quality of life. So I think shifting that perspective is really important.
Especially since there have been so many cases of suicide. A lot of parents are opening their eyes to, man, I should be more open about it with my child. I think it would destroy a parent if, you didn't tell them how you were feeling and then something bad happened and then they regret it. They regret not being open to you, or I guess approachable.
There will be moments and times where you won't be as strong and you'll have low points. Those only help you grow stronger, but sometimes we need help. You don't need to always do it alone. And when you help other people, if anything, it enables you to have an overall better way of understanding your own mental health. We're going on a pretty good path where we're a lot more open and aware than we used to be, and I'm really grateful for that.
I don't know, it just it didn't feel possible to be this normal and not to have my thoughts go so fast and be thinking things that weren't real.
I feel like if I had to choose one thing for my life, I really just want to be happy.
You can only have so much power in a conversation. And that starts from just allowing the conversation to happen. That's the first step, right? And if people feel like they're being treated with respect and understanding, then they're going to feel okay, maybe there's something here worth listening to.